Hola amigos, in today's video I'm gonna give you 7 tips for creating excellent panels or panoramic images. Then I'm gonna show you in Lightroom how to combine those images, and at the end I'm gonna give you an additional tip that I think works really well. When we take images to form a panel, we're gonna grab our camera and take a series of images, and then we're gonna stitch them together. But what do we need to do in order to guarantee that we are taking the right images? Well, and this is where the 7 tips come in. The first one doesn't have to do anything with our camera. It has to do with an additional tool that we have to visualize what the result may be. And that's to use our phone. Whether you have a phone from Apple, an iPhone, or an Android, you're going to have an app for the camera or cameras that will allow you to create panels. Sometimes the panels are very good, especially you have one of the latest generation phones. But you can also use it as a way to visualize what the resulting image may look like before you take the time to get your camera gear out and go through the effort of taking multiple images. So tip number 1, use your phone as a visualization aid. For the next tip, once you have your camera, what I want you to do is make sure you're in manual mode. You're going to have to take the photo in manual mode. If you're in automatic or semi-automatic like aperture priority or shutter priority, what's going to happen is that as you move your camera, the exposure may change. And when you blend the images, you're going to see these continuities in exposure during the length of the panel. So to avoid that, it's better to take the exposure in manual mode. When we take the images, should we take horizontal images or vertical images? Well, it's up to you. If you take a horizontal image, you may be able to do it with 2 or 3 images. If you have a very high resolution camera like the Canon R5 that has 45 megapixels, that may be enough. But if you want to have the highest resolution panel, what I recommend is you take the image vertically. And you may need more images, 5, 6, 7, 8 images. But remember, with digital cameras, every click is free. We don't have to worry about additional costs other than storing it in the memory card. So I recommend for panels to result in the highest resolution image to take the images in a vertical orientation. The next one is we need to set the exposure. We have it in manual mode, so we need to evaluate the scene and look for where we think is the brightest area. Once you find the brightest part of the scene, then set your shutter speed, your aperture, and your ISO. Now, there may be some cases like you're inside of an old church or a cathedral where you have very bright areas like beautiful windows and then very dark areas, and you may have to do a bracket set of exposures and do what is called a HDR panel. That's a little more complicated. We're not going to worry about that on this video. Great majority of the scenes, all we have to do is find the brightest area, set your exposure for that, and that way we guarantee that we're not going to run into any problems when we edit the image. The next tip has to do with how much overlap do we need to have between subsequent images. And I recommend about 1/3. So as you move around, make sure you overlap the images about 1/3. That's going to help the program, whatever program you're using, Lightroom, Photoshop on one, Luminar, to do a good job of finding the common areas between the images and doing the conversion into a single image. The next tip has to do with how we take the image. Avoid putting the camera away from your body and taking the image in a big circle. The bigger the circle, the more area you're going to lose on the edges of the image as your favorite program tries to stitch those images together. I prefer to have the camera close to my face and do a small circle rotation, and that's going to minimize how much area I'm going to lose. If you're on a tripod, the camera is going to rotate over the tripod head, and that's going to basically give you a very tight circle. So with a tripod, no problem, but if you're doing it by hand, make sure you don't go on a big circle. Keep it tight, and that's going to help you avoid lost areas in the image. Now, talking about lost areas that you're going to get on near the corners, the other one has to do with make sure you give yourself more room than what you think you need. Because as the images are stitched together, remember, you took the images in a tight circle. Those images are going to have to be not only stitched together, but are going to have to be flattened, and that introduces a lot of distortion near the edges or white areas where there are not going to be any pixels. I recommend that you try to make the individual photos a little wider, maybe 10-20% wider than what you need. Top, bottom, and also the first and the last photo, make sure you include additional space. These tips work for any type of camera that you have, but I'm going to show you in Lightroom what I did with a series of images for a panel that I took in the city of Bilbao in Spain. Here I am in Lightroom, and this image, this panel, was taken with my iPhone. And it was just, again, to visualize what the resulting panel may look like once I took the effort to get my camera out. When I look at this image, I like it, but there are some things I would like to change in the final panel. One is we had beautiful clouds that afternoon, so I want to have more of the sky included on the image. I also felt that the greenery on the bottom was a little bit too tight. So I want a little bit additional green on the bottom of the image. The edges, I think, look fine, but I wanted to give myself just a little bit more space on the edges. So I followed the tips that I gave you, and I took a series of images. Here is the first one, second, third, and again, I'm overlapping about a third, and I think I had 7 different images. All I had to do in Lightroom to create the panel is select the first one, select the last one, click with the right button, go to Photo Merge. I'm going to have HDR Panorama and HDR Panorama. We're going to select the middle option, Panorama, and it's going to open a new window. It's going to take a few seconds to create a visualization. It's not going to be the highest resolution image, but at least we are able to see what the resulting panel may look like. Now, we have a few options of controls that we can pick. Let's start with the top section. Select a projection. As I told you, we're taking those images in a circle, right? And it's going to have to open up those images. So there are 3 mathematical projections that it uses: spherical, cylindrical, and perspective. And I recommend you click on all of them. For example, perspective is going to try to keep the perspective, I guess, but it results in a lot of lost space. You can see it here on the bottom of the image. If you're doing a panel in a city with buildings, close-up of buildings, that may be the best one. But for most cases, I find that either spherical or cylindrical may work. It's up to you depending on the type of panel that you're doing. For this one, I'm going to keep it on cylindrical. And I see I lost some space. You can see some white areas here on the bottom and also on the top right and the top left corner, areas with that pixel. Now, to deal with those areas with the pixels, we have 3 different choices. One is called boundary warp. Basically, it's going to warp the image. We can move that control to the right, and it tries to warp the image, stretch it to try to cover those white areas. This is going to introduce some distortion. Minor warping for most scenes probably is not a big deal. But we now have another option called Fill Edges. And if I click on that box, what Lightroom is going to do is going to take the same technology that is available in Photoshop or content aware fill. It's going to look at the textures of what is around those white areas, and it's going to create pixels for them. And if you have clouds, sky, greenery, it tends to do a very nice job. It's hard to appreciate with the small visualization, but it covered those white areas really nice. And I recommend you do this because if you turn it off and we close here and we go to the develop module, those white areas are still going to be present. And I'm not going to be able to use the healing brush or generative AI to repair those areas. The only option you're going to have is to crop. So I prefer to fill them now because after I make the panel large on my screen, in the develop module, if I don't like him, I can always have the choice to crop. Or I can use my healing brush to change it. So I think by clicking it, it gives us more flexibility. The next one is auto crop. If you don't fill, we can select auto crop, and that automatically is going to crop the image to eliminate those white areas. You can always change that crop once you go back to develop. So I'm going to fill edges. And the next one is auto settings. Lightroom is going to adjust blacks and whites and so on, depending on what it thinks. It gives you a good start. So I'm going to leave it on. And the next one is create a stack. All this a way to organize your images. It creates a stack with the source images that you provided and the final panel on the same stack. It's up to you if you want to do it or not. On my case, I'm not going to do it. And then finally, we're going to do merge. If your source images were RAW files, the resulting file is going to be a DNG. If your source images are JPEGs, the resulting file is going to be a JPEG. I already generated the file. I'm going to cancel out. Generating the file may take 15, 20, 30 seconds depending on how fast your computer is. This was the resulting panel that Lightroom generated for me. And as I told you, this is a DNG. Very nice file. Now you can do your final edits. And you can see the content aware field did a nice job on the upper right, on the edges on the bottom, and on the upper left. I'm not going to bore you through the edit, but what I did is I did all my edits, and this is the final panel for me. I cropped it a bit, I rotated it a little, and I did edits to my taste. Now, if you follow these 7 steps, you're gonna have very good source images to give you a very nice panel that you can then edit. Now, I promised you an 8th tip, and that has to do with how wide should we make the panel. Well, for my taste, a 1:2 panel looks very nice. 1:3, I think it still looks nice, maybe starts to be a little bit long. 1:4, for my taste, is a little bit long, and there are some practical limitations of a very long panel. Let's go back to Lightroom. So I had shown you this resulting panel, and this one is 1:2.5. I'm going to make it full screen. So on a standard, widescreen on my monitor, or you're going to display it on a widescreen TV, you're going to get an image like this one. And it's very clear we can appreciate the panel. We're only losing maybe about 1/4 of the screen on the top and the bottom. But we have enough height on the panel to be able to appreciate the detail that we have on the panel that we created. If we make a little longer panel, this one is 1:3, and this one, by the way, was done with my iPhone, not with my camera. And 1:3, I think I still have enough height to appreciate the detail on the panel, but now I'm losing about 1/3 of the screen. And if I go to a 1:4 panel, now you see I'm losing at least half of the screen. And you start having the problem of enough height to appreciate all the detail. that you have on the panel. This one was done with my camera. I think I had 9 or 10 different images. So 1x4, for my taste, I think it's a little too long. Not only is it difficult to find a way to project it on the screen, but also you want to print it, you run into a problem. Let's say you wanted to get something like 10 inches high, you're going to end up with 40 inches wide, right? It's going to be very expensive to print, and it's going to be very expensive to frame. So very long panels, probably not the best thing. Try to stick to things in the 1 to 2, 1 to 3 range. Well, amigos, those were the 7 tips plus an additional one for you to work on creating excellent panels. I hope you like them and put them to good use. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Give me a thumbs up. Send me your comments, what type of videos you would like to see. And by the way, this was a great recommendation to do something on panel by one of you. So thank you, and I'll see you next time.